Hello everybody and welcome back. So today we are going to be doing a deep dive into the King Air C90B, I think it is. The manual's for B. So the manual that has a lot of this information is actually in your Steam, well, if you've got the Steam version, Steam Apps Common X-Plane 11. If you just have it installed locally, then it's in wherever your X-Plane 11 setup is set up. So in there, you go into your aircraft Laminar Research, which is actually the company that makes X-Plane 11. So this is their default aircraft. Then the King Air C90B, X-Plane 11. Well, then you're looking at the Pilot Operating Handbook. So it covers all this information in quite a lot of detail. It doesn't tell you everything, and I have found a few things that are wrong, but it'll get you through. So, we are going to start pretty much where they do, with the fuel management panel. So not all of this is actually implemented. Not everything is done. I don't know if it's going to be worked again. These transfer pumps. So the transfer pumps move the fuel from the low side of the wing in here to the high side of the wing up here. That does two things for you. One, it makes the airplane a little bit more steady. It makes all the mass on the outside so that it's not going to pitch a lot faster. So it'll make it a little bit less violent of a ride. It'll fly better in turbulence. Your control inputs will have a little bit more effect, and it'll kind of stick a little better. That's number one. Number two is that the engines are actually on the low side of the wing. They are lower than the top of the wing, so this can actually be gravity fed. Even while you're in the air, even in turns and banks, gravity is still mostly going to be going down for the normal. So these tanks will also have gravity assist, which fills up the engines, which does two things. One, it saves your pumps, and two, it gives you a better head pressure so that you're not constantly fighting with trying to shove fuel into the engine. It's more of letting it flow into the engine. So that's what these do, but they're not implemented. So if you ever actually get in a real one of these, now you know what they do and why they're there. Boost pumps are quite literally an auxiliary set of pumps that just is there to create head pressure. Most of the time, these are used on engine startup, although they're not necessary because the nacelle tanks can feed it. Although if those are empty, you're going to probably run the engine dry, which is a very bad thing. And these are turboprop engines. We won't get into that. So the boost pump, they are, well, that's literally just to shove fuel. It pressurizes the lines, it keeps things that you can actually, when you open the nozzle, that it actually squirts through, whereas if you just had gravity fed, then you had to have to wait for the fuel to just fall in there. You'd have to have air circulating in there, the works. So the boost pumps are there to make a constant fuel flow and without any gaps. The transfer test doesn't actually do anything, which is unhelpful. The fuel quantity total is total versus nacelle. In the real world, it will show you on these gauges how much is in the entire wing versus just the nacelle up top. So if you run the main tank dry on the bottom, then you'll know that you're only on the nacelle tanks and nothing else is going to happen. Unfortunately, this is not modeled, or else we would be able to turn on the electricity, see our fuel quantity, hit the button, and then we'd see probably half. We'd see whatever the max fuel nacelle is, so if the pump stops working, then the nacelle will start draining, and at that point you've got to start doing things like the crossfeed. So, this will open the crossfeed. I believe this is also not modeled, which is not helpful. So, say your left engine, or your left fuel line, say the pump goes out, or the line gets a kink in it, it freezes, something like that. Then you can still feed the left engine from the right pump, or vice versa, by turning on the crossfeed. Essentially opens a three-way valve that will send fuel over to the other engine in case one of your tanks basically dies. Basic ways to read this. It's in thousands of pounds. So, it's in hundreds of pounds. So that's 200 pounds, that's 400 pounds, that's 600 pounds per side. So if both of these are on the 6, then you're actually looking at 1,200 pounds of fuel. What you use that for, so we're a little over 6, so we currently have about 12,000 and maybe 100 pounds of fuel. And that's 700, that's 250, so we have actually closer to 12,400 pounds of fuel, somewhere around there. So it's measured in pounds because everything, your moment, your center of gravity, that's all done in pounds. It's very important that the center of gravity is same, and as you burn it, it also lightens your load, which means you have to do other additional calculations. So it's measured in pounds, and I believe uh, Jet A is something. They're all around 10 pounds because they're mostly watery, essentially, and water is very close to, I think it's 7, but everything's pretty much around 10 pounds. So you can roughly say I need 50 gallons, add 500 pounds of fuel. So that's roughly how that works. It varies depending on the grades you get. If you're getting diesel, it might be on one end of the spectrum. If you're getting super refined stuff, it might be on the other end of the spectrum. I believe Jet A is 12 pounds. Or else it's lighter and it's like 7 pounds. I always forget which one's what versus normal gas. But, yeah. You can look it up if you actually want to know the numbers. Since X-Plane does it in pounds, we can just set the fuel in pounds and not worry about the gallons. So that's only a real-world thing. You don't actually have to know that for the simulator. So we are going to head over and do the primary flight instruments. So this is a non-standard 6-pack. That is a standard 6-pack. Well, it's close to a standard 6-pack. Normally, you have this on the left, that on the right, and you have another one of these, essentially. This is also in the wrong order for a standard 6-pack, so it's just a King Air quirk. But we're primarily going to talk about this guy because that is most of the time what you're going to use to fly. I'm actually going to power it up so you can see what it has and what we do with it. So, battery, master avionics, and we have to turn the EFIS on as well. The EFIS is this center panel. Normally, you would have just an attitude indicator, and you would have just this guy. For these, you wouldn't have them in a digital screen. So, we will essentially go clockwise. So this is your, and we'll follow the manual, just in case I want to pull some details. So here's your airspeed. There's a lot of critical information on here. This is VX, I believe. This is VY. So, if you climb out, sorry, VY and VX. This is your speed never to exceed. That's V and E. You never, ever, ever want to go faster than that needle. If you do, things will start to fail. So things like your airspeed indicator could have some problems with overpressure. It could actually blow up a bladder in there. It's a diaphragm, and it could actually rupture that. You can have things like your lights are going to start falling off, your gear are going to fail, you could have doors start ripping open, the flaps can jam, your ailerons can start snapping. It's a bad thing. In the simulator, you can turn that off, but real world, never exceed that speed. This little white arc is your gear arc. So never extend the gear when you're going faster than this arc. This blue line, like I said earlier, is VX, I believe it is. No, I always get them backwards. But essentially, it's your best climb speed. So that is your optimal, over the entire life of the flight, you will get the best performance out of that. So you will get the most altitude for distance and speed. So that's usually where you want to climb out at. That looks like about 108, 109 knots. These numbers vary with how much you weigh. So your rate of climb will definitely change with how much you weigh. So if you're really heavy, you might still be able to hit that 108 on climb out, but you're definitely not going to be climbing out the 2800 or so that it says is max climb out. This little red line, that is your best climb for the least amount of ground. So say you have a building at the end of the runway that you have to climb over, and it's a non-standard exit. Basically, you would use that, and essentially you would pitch for it, so you would keep the speed, and you'd pitch up as much or as little as you need. On the very bottom of the curve, though, because you'll stall pretty close to underneath that. I think this aircraft stalls somewhere around 72. I don't remember. We're going to do some performance testing and we'll get all these numbers down. But the red line is your best climb up for the least distance. So if you have to go straight up as fast as you can before you hit an obstacle, that's the one you want to use. That'll get you straight up. If they tell you climb before you hit this tower, that's the one you use. That's if you're coming up to a mountain, that's the one you want to use. Normally we use this blue one. That's your optimal. Okay, so this is your electronic attitude director indicator. Basically, this is your attitude director. So it tells you if you're going up, down, rolling left or right, and it doesn't tell you your slip, so it won't tell you your horizontal. Each of these, it goes by the very tip of the chevron. So up and down, here's 5 degrees, here's 10 degrees, 15 degrees, it keeps going up and down. They're only marked so far on most aircraft because most of them are not designed to go really high nose up, really far nose down. These guys are used on ILSs. I believe they have a couple of other uses, such as going to VORs, but I'm not 100% sure on that because I always use this guy, but we'll cover him later. So, essentially, these are 2.5 degree tick marks. So this is when this arrow points it here, that means you are 2.5 degrees too high. When it's here, too low. You need to come up so that you're 2.5 degrees higher on the glide slope. When it is all the way up, that means you are 5 degrees below the glide slope, and essentially you should be on the top path, but you're on the bottom path, and you need to increase your altitude so that you are coming down on the correct glide path. We will cover all that when we go into instruments and actually running ILSs, etc. So these are 10 degree tick marks as well. 10 degrees, 15, 10, 20, 30, I can count, I swear. Here's 45, that is an extreme angle of bank. You don't normally want to be there. 30 is kind of where that's comfortable for passengers. You don't really want to be exceeding 30 degrees unless you are really trying to get a turn going. 60 degrees is the max limit. If you hit 60 degrees and go past that, you're into what's called aerobatic ratings. So anything more than 60 degrees of bank is considered an aerobatic maneuver. That's a non-standard pilot rating, essentially, so you have to go out and get that rating in addition to your pilot's license before you're allowed to fly that. And on commercial flights, you're definitely not allowed to fly that. So, one more real quick thing that is not normally here is that you have a ball here, which is essentially, it tells you your slip. If you're flying sideways through the air, or if you're in a turn and you're slipping up on the wall, kind of, think NASCAR, if you're sliding up on that wall, but you're still pointed this other direction, that's what this will tell you. So if it's off to the left, you need to actually step on the left rudder. If it's off to the right, you want to step on the right rudder, which actually brings us into this little guy over here, which is a turn bank coordinator. So when this is pointed directly at the L, you're in a 2-minute turn. It will take you exactly 2 minutes to do 360 degrees. This does have a ball for the slip indicator, just like this, but normally you're flying this, and that will tell you if you're flying straight instead of looking all the way over here. But yeah, this will tell you if you are straight on the L or straight on the R. That's a 2-minute right or left turn. That's a standard turn. So if ATC tells you turn to X heading, that's what you want to fly. You want to turn directly there. So if you're only doing 90 degrees turn, then you're going to take 30 seconds. If you're doing 180 degrees, it should take you exactly 1 minute. And if you're doing 360, then it should take you exactly 2 minutes. So if they need to space you out, they go based on time, not speeds. So if you are too close, say you only have 4 minutes or 3 minutes of spacing and you need to be at least 5 minutes behind the guy that's landing in front of you, then they can tell you to do a left 360 or a right 360, and that will add 2 minutes to the time and will space you out at 5-minute landing intervals, which it depends on the aircraft, but 5 minutes is a pretty standard landing interval. Moving on to the next one, this little guy, they go in a weird order. They're going speed, attitude, navigation. Anyways, this is your electronic horizontal situational indicator. There is a non-electronic version of these guys all over here, and these run on vacuum. So that's why this is a little off, because it actually requires the engines to be spinning and running essentially think an air compressor. And it will spin things in the back of here. There's a lot more math behind it, but essentially these will only work when the engines are running, and you need vacuum pressure for those. These will work if the engines are off and broken because they are electronic, so they are taking essentially outside information from sensors to use that, or to tell you where you are, versus spinning a little ball in the back, which keeps it center while you turn. So basically, you actually turn around the ball on the other one, whereas this one, it computes that you're tipped up at 5 degrees and it displays that here. Okay, navigation on the horizontal situational indicator. This is a major part of what you are actually using. So this does a lot of, you basically navigate from this. You can do a little bit of navigation here, but this is how you navigate. So this little purple guy is your heading caret, and you use that basically as a, I want to fly this way, or to tell the autopilot, fly this way. So say that they give us a heading of 090, you're going to come down here, and you're going to actually turn the heading to the one you want. And unfortunately, there's nothing up here, so it's a good thing to map, but it's not critical. But essentially, you're going to turn this until it gets to the heading you want. If you want to go to your current heading, you can actually push, and it will sync with your current heading. The little purple caret is both a ATC told you to go to 120. You start making your left turn, and you will put this on 120. That way you know I need to stop and fly 120. It's 30 seconds down the road, you've drifted a little bit, you're flying 125. And you forgot what the number was, you can just fly the caret, you can fly the little indent, and that's your heading button. This other line is your course. So you actually use this for a couple of different things. Say you want to fly a radial, you can fly to or from something by dialing in that course, dialing in a beacon, and when all the lines are lined up, you are going directly to or from that, and then if you're flying on that, then you can head directly to or from if you want to go 90 degrees off. Since this one's at, say it's at 180, it's not, but say it is, then if we want to fly 90 degrees to a beacon, essentially we can, if we need to fly an arc, we can point that at the beacon, and then we can fly 90 degrees and essentially stay on that beacon because that will always point to it. You also have your glide slope indicator, and you have a couple of other things. Ground speed, you can set this to wind. This currently says Colorado Springs where we are, and that's our distance to the VOR. And we are currently on localizer 1. We can switch to localizer 2. Lots of information. Here's our course. I think sometimes you can get the information up here for your heading, but I don't see it at the moment. Next in the manual is the turn indicator, which we actually covered already because I went out of order. Very important. This is your altimeter. So it has quite a bit of information in this tiny little gauge. That's helpful. So we're currently at 5,800 feet. This, 860 feet? 50 feet. 50 feet. Yep, so it's halfway between 40 and 60. This one apparently goes in 20s, and goes in 1s, 1s, and 1s. So, as this spins around, you can watch it. Normally there is a second dial that would be pointed somewhere around right here, and that'll show you that you are at 5,800 feet. So, that's how you would normally, actually, sorry, it would be pointed here at 5,000. So you would be able to see that. And it is, this has all three. So this one is your 10,000s needle. Kind of think of it like a clock. 10,000s needle, it's pointed about 5,000. This is your thousands needle. It's pointed almost at 6,000, but we're still in the 5,000 range. And this one is pointed at 850, which essentially big, little, so 0, 5, 8, 5. Same way you read a clock. This guy, you kind of have to read it. It only has this which you'd normally use for, say, altitude keeping. Say they assigned you 800 feet, or 5,800 feet, you would use this to make sure that you're not going above or below it. There is a digital readout there. I believe it's actually analog, but it shows you a number. These two are your barometric pressure. You can obtain this several ways. You can get it from the ATIS, which we'll cover later. Sometimes a controller will actually give it to you, and above 18,000 feet, the standard is always 2992. That's standard pressure, period. Anything over 18,000 feet, that's the only number you fly, 2992. Even if it's wrong, it's the same as what everybody else is flying. So because everybody's on the same thing, nobody's going to hit each other. The way you change that, there's a little there's a little knob here, and you can adjust that. Say you've got 309, plug that in. And this is also a good way of testing your altimeter. So say that you get the ATIS and it's 2990, but you know that the altitude that you're actually at is at 5,700 feet. You look at this, you plug it in, you go, uh-oh, that's off. That's a discrepancy. At that point, you have to actually have maintenance take a look at that, and they've got to look at that and recertify the altimeter because the diaphragm might have gone out. It's just reading wrong. Also, if you're in Europe, we use inches of mercury, which is 29.92 inches of mercury at sea level. They use pascals, hectopascals? I don't remember, but essentially they use one long number. So it's 1013, 1010, 1040, sometimes below 1000, 998, etc. So you get those when you fly in Europe. I'm not sure the simulator's set up for it, but essentially those are more of a European rating, and you would tune the exact same way, just like that. This airplane is currently set up to fly in the US, so one tick of this changes one tick of this. If it was set up to fly in Europe, then it would adjust this more accurately. Okay, they cover the chronometer. I don't like that. This is your variable speed indicator. It's a variometer, I believe it's called. Yep, variometer. And essentially, it tells you if you're going up or down and how much. So if we are going up, so if we're climbing at 500 feet per minute, this is going to be pointed at directly 500, and that'll tell you you're going up at 500 feet per minute. If it's up at 1,000, you're going up 1,000 feet per minute. If this drops very rapidly to like 4,000 or 6,000, and you're in straight and level flight, you are in a significant microburst, and you need to go full throttle and run. But normally, you'll use this for either if you would need to climb a glide slope, etc. You can actually calculate a specific glide slope and fly the up and down based on that. On approach, you will normally, depends on your airplane, Cessnas are about 400 feet per minute. This one, we're probably going to be pretty close to the same, maybe not quite. Be a little different. We're going to again do some performance benchmarking later. And yeah, but basically this is telling you you're going up at this rate, you're going down at this rate. So if you have to calculate, am I going to clear that mountain? You can take your airspeed you can take your ground speed, your distance from the mountain, and you can take this guy and say, I'm climbing up at 1,000 feet per minute, I'm 3 minutes out from the mountain, I'm going to be climbing 3,000 feet, add that to your altitude, and see if you'll clear the mountain. So, useful for that. It's a lot of math. Being loud. But yeah, alright, so we are going to cover, we'll continue going in the manuals order from now on. This is the chronometer. It's a clock. Go figure. It has GMT, or Greenwich Mean Time, which all ATIS are in Greenwich Mean Time. They will always tell you 1900 Zulu. Zulu is Greenwich Mean Time. I think it's the middle of England. But essentially they are 0 on the time scale. Okay. This does, yeah, you can only set this for time. It's just a clock. Nice and simple. Alright. This is the VOR ADF. You can turn it to tune an ADF or a VOR. So when you set the comm channel or the navigation channel, to a VOR or an ADF, you can come over here, and it will basically point you to where it is. So if we tune in a VOR, we have it on VOR. So this is VOR 1, this is VOR 2. If you've got VOR 1 up, it will point to the VOR. So say it's due east of us, then it will literally just point. It won't tell you the distance, but it will just point. So that way, if you want to fly, actually this is where you would fly the radial. So if you wanted to always keep it 90 degrees off to your left, this is 45 degrees, this is 90, this is 45, 90, this is the direction you're headed, and this is directly out the tail, again 45, 45. So if you wanted to keep it directly off your left wing and you just want to maintain that circle around a VOR, you would plug it in right there, and you would just keep this pointed straight off your left wing, and you would turn, this compass would turn. You would have to maintain a bank, but you would be able to use it that way. Next one is this E80i EHSI dimmer. So say you're flying at night, these instruments are too bright. The outer one controls the top, that's scrolling down, that's scrolling up, and you can also turn them completely off. I wouldn't really recommend it because this is a primary flight display. The inner knob, so it's kind of a two-tier knob. If you turn the inside one, it does the top. If you do the outside one, it will do the bottom. So there's the bottom, there's the top. And you can set a timer in this aircraft. When that timer hits 0, it will flash this light at you. Nice and simple. They go next to the prop sync. So this is not at all a necessary feature. It does two things. One, it reduces vibrations, so it will make your aircraft just that smidgen more effective or more efficient. And number two, which is the biggest benefit, is that when the props are synced, you will get a lot less noise. So when props are out of sync, kind of that that you hear, where it sounds like a vibration, you know, when you go down the highway and you've only got one window open and an overpressure, underpressure, and you hear the whoop, 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 whoop. It does kind of the same thing. You'll actually hear the props out of sync, and it's essentially you're listening to one prop and then the other, and it creates a huge amount of noise. And when you turn the prop sync on, it will slightly vary the speed of one of them, so that they're turning at the exact same rate, which will sync them up. It will A, sound better, and B, give you a little bit better performance. I normally turn it on, but it's definitely not necessary. If you ever have to feather an engine, say you have an engine fire or an engine out, you definitely want this off, or else it will feather your other engine as well. That's a bad thing. They covered the variometer then, but we don't need to right there. So next thing we cover is this gigantic set of gauges. We'll start at the top and work our way down. So this is your inner stage turbine temperature. It's always known as ITT. This is essentially right in the middle of the engine where all the flames are. That's what this is measuring. Standard operating range for this aircraft is between 400 degrees Celsius and 700 degrees Celsius. If you exceed that in normal flight, you're in trouble. On startup, this little guy that says start, that's your max engine temperature. So if you go over this, you're going to get a hot start. There's probably flames coming out the back of the engine. That's a bad thing. So these are turboprop engines, which essentially means it's a jet engine with a big propeller on the front. So it works the exact same as the big jets, but it's just in cage. Air goes in the front, air comes out the back, spins the shaft, spins the prop. It's basically a direct prop coupled jet engine. So they're very efficient at medium altitude. Low to medium altitude. Sorry, medium altitude. Jet engines are very efficient at high altitude with very little air. Straight piston aircraft are good at low altitude. They're very efficient there, much more efficient than a jet engine is. And then at mid altitude, a turboprop has the most bite for your fuel. Yeah, when you do a full start, it will come up here probably up to 950, maybe even over 1,000 degrees Celsius, which is really hot. But if it ever goes over this almost 11,000 degrees Celsius, or 1,100 degrees Celsius, that's a hot start, and you need to do a couple of things. You keep the prop turning, you cut off fuel. We'll cover those procedures later, but essentially, this is the line you look at, and then once the engine spools up, you want it to come all the way back down below this other red line, and if it ever goes above that red line again, that's bad. That means you've got a hot engine. And it's very simple on these. Left column is left engine, right column is right engine. They're the exact same, both left and right. They just read left and right. If you get two different numbers, that means either something is different, your controls are not configured the same on both sides, or something actually happened. Which, unless you set it up for it, or you broke something, not likely to happen. Okay, so these are your torque meters. They tell you essentially how hard the props are biting into the air. So, kind of the same measure of a car, but instead of having one just super high torque or super low torque, you get one torque number in a car. You can adjust the torque. So you can, these are fixed, they're fixed speed, constant speed props. That's the name I'm looking for. Essentially, they will turn at an exact RPM, and they will change the amount of bite that they get to slow it down or to speed it up. So if you, on startup, you always want it really fast, really responsive, low amount of torque, but you'll get that torque very soon. So if you, it's kind of like a small turbo versus a big turbo in a car. If you've got a small turbo, it's instantly providing power. If you've got a big turbo, it's going to grab a lot of air and it's going to shove it in, but you might have to wait a second or two. Same kind of thing with this. It's just a measure of torque that is changed by this little blue lever, which is that little guy. So that is essentially changing the prop, which you're actually changing the prop RPMs, not necessarily the bite, and it will change the bite to maintain those RPMs, which will produce some amount of torque. So this gauge is actually more of a byproduct. You'll get X amount of torque for a certain amount of fuel in and bite of the air. So that's essentially what it's measuring, how good it's biting the air. If it's cold air, it'll probably bite more. If it's less air, or if it's warm air, it will probably bite less. Okay, onto the prop. So this is a measure of the prop RPM. So this is the number of times that the, no? Yes. This is your N1, I believe, on the big jets. Turbine is N2. I might be backwards on those. But essentially, it's measuring how many times per minute the prop is spinning. You want it somewhere in the green range. Below, you're probably stalled. If it's above, the thing's like it's breaking Mach. The tips of the propellers are about to snap off. A bad thing. And it will do it on the bottom of the arc, shoving it straight towards you on the right engine. And I don't remember if these are counter-rotating. I don't think they are. I think both of them go right. Which means that if you're ever overspeeding and the tip of a prop snaps off, in real life it will throw it straight over, but it'll probably get sucked up by the jet stream. Who knows? It'll probably be gone, but it's a bad thing. So, do not exceed the red line, stay within the green range. You're pretty well good. If you're getting down here towards the bottom end, you're probably, it's not having fun. It's got a huge amount of torque, but it's slowing down the engine so much that it's just not efficient. So you adjust these based on the manual, and I believe this does not have any prop ratings. So some aircraft actually come with a engine manifold pressure and a prop speed. This one does not. We don't need those on. So this one does not have a rating. So essentially you have to go look in the pilot operating handbook for the fuel setting and the prop setting to give you either a fuel flow, a distance, or a speed. So essentially, if you want to go really fast at the distance and you don't care if you burn more gas, it will tell you what the best prop setting is to get you there the fastest. If you want to go super far, it will tell you what the most fuel efficient prop setting is, and you will change the number essentially by moving this blue lever, which is again, the one in the middle. This changes your prop. You will almost always move them together. The only time you will not is when you have a engine essentially die. Or in the real world, if one of them just runs better, you'll have to adjust them slightly off. Because usually you have one better engine, but it doesn't happen in the simulator. They're the exact same. This is turbine speed. So this is inside the engine. There's essentially a shaft with a gigantic set of fan blades, just like you see on the normal big jets, like a 737. That giant fan blade in the front, there's a bunch of little ones inside the engine, and it tells you the percentage of the max RPM that it can do. So it's essentially spinning as fast as it can if it's at 100%. If it's only at 50%, well, you're pretty much stalling it. It doesn't have enough spin to suck in enough air to ignite enough fuel to squirt it out the back and spin the prop in the front. So just keep it in the green. This is controlled by your throttle lever. You will add more fuel and it will increase the turbine RPM, or you can decrease and it will drop the turbine RPM because you're adding more fuel or less fuel. Kind of same in the car as a throttle pedal with an actual throttle body versus modern cars. It will throw more fuel in the engine, which will explode harder and give you more energy. In this, it's literally just a constant stream of fuel. So it's just opening and closing a fire hose, essentially. Below that, we have the fuel flow in pounds per hour. Do not forget, this is only the left engine, this is only the right engine. So if you're both at 400 pounds per hour, you're burning 800 pounds of fuel per hour. Don't forget that when you're actually doing it, because if you're at 800 pounds per hour and you only have 400 pounds in each tank, you have 1 hour of flight. So just be conscious of that one. And there's reserves, minimums, and everything else that we'll cover later. But for now, enough said. This basically just tells you how fast you're burning fuel per hour. If you're going fuel efficient, you can get it down here. If you're just like on climb out, it's way on the high end of the gauge. So you just have to be very cognizant of your fuel burn. You have to know those in pre-planning, and you also have to hit those targets when you're actually flying, but you can't sacrifice too much speed for the sake of fuel burn. You kind of have to have a balance, and those are in the operating handbook, or you can just kind of wing it. Most of the time I ended up winging it, but there are a couple of easy ones that you can find in the operator's handbook. Not in the one that comes with X-Plane. You have to look at the real one, or you can actually benchmark it yourself, which we'll see if I go into that. That's a long flight, and essentially it's just set it up for fuel flow, measure your distance. There's a couple different ways of doing it. But never forget, those are left and right individually. You have to add them together to get your actual fuel flow. Oil pressure, left and right. Sorry, oil temperature and pressure. This is degrees Celsius, how hot or cold the oil is. It's currently 40 degrees outside, which is something like 8 Celsius. And we're below 10, about 7, 8-ish, so makes sense. So this is temperature. Again, keep it below the red. If you have a lot of fuel coming in, but you're running it very lean, so you're not giving it a lot of, you're giving it too much air, so it doesn't actually have enough fuel to cool itself. I know it sounds weird, but the fuel actually cools the engine. If you're not giving it the right fuel-to-air mixture ratio, you can heat up the engine. At that point, your engine temperatures are going up, or you might have something like a stuck fuel pump. If the if the oil pump is broken, I think it's mechanical on this aircraft. No, it's probably electric because it's a turbine shaft, or else they pulled it off. And anyways, if this ever goes low and you've got low oil pressure, that could mean, low oil temperature, that means you could have either too rich of a mixture and you're actually running the engine too cold and the oil too cold, or you could have a high kind of runaway fuel pump and it's pumping way too fast. You're going to have a high pressure and a low temperature, which is also a bad thing. And coming over to the other side, you have pounds per square inch of pressure in the oil. Essentially, keep it above the minimum, keep it below the maximum. If you ever hit that, it's probably already exploded. This little green section is basically where you want it. It's an auto-regulated thing, so realistically you're never going to get it to be dropping or etc. unless you have a pump fail, you have contaminants, you lose oil, bad thing. But again, unless you set it up, you won't have those failures. Okay. That's a lot of information on what these gauges are. We'll go into how you use them and how they're influenced mostly by the throttle quadrant, somewhat by pitch and angle. Not at all done by pitch and angle, actually. Prop RPM can be. Prop and torque will kind of have an effect. Like if you pitch way up and you're trying to go straight up, as the engine slows, because you don't have any airflow going over it, that will change it. As you go faster, you'll get better torque, etc. So that will change as your speed does, but for the most part, this will be set, and it will not change unless your outside air density changes. So say you're climbing or dropping, or if you fly into a storm, if you're actually doing a cross-country flight and you have different pressures, that will change it as well. Okay, that was the long-winded explanation. We are now going into the aviation panel. So, lots of information here. Again, all this is in the pilot handbook, so if you want to just go look at that and read that, it's easy enough. But there's a lot of reading. It's a 63-page manual. And yeah, so starting up in the top left, these are your comms. Autocom I've never actually used. I'm not entirely sure it's implemented, but it's a thing. I think it just switches between your comms. So if you turn both 1 and 2 on, and Autocom, whatever's making noise will probably pipe through. Whereas if you've got 2 on but it's not tuned, usually you'll get this squelch, so it's just this static that's coming through. So you normally want to turn it off unless you're using it. And you've got 2 comms for 2 reasons. 1 for redundancy, and 2 for actually pulling up other information. Normally I will talk on COM 1, I will broadcast on COM 1, and on COM 2 I'll get things like the ATIS, I'll monitor the emergency frequency, stuff like that. That's for the comms. This is for the pilot side, this is for the co-pilot side. They work the exact same except for the autocom buttons on the outside on the co-pilot side. So say co-pilot only wants to listen on 2, can just listen on 2. He doesn't have to talk to ATC, and he can go get the weather and completely ignore ATC, which you're not supposed to do, but yeah. Navigation. So when you tune in a navigation beacon, it will actually send out a Morse code that you pick up, and you can listen to it, essentially. So you tune nav 1 to a beacon, and you turn this on, and it will actually beep out a Morse code that you're supposed to verify. There it is. So, if I actually pull up the chart, If I actually pull up the chart, it'll have a dot-dash combination that we can actually look up and follow. Same thing with the marker beacons, DMEs, and ADS. They will all broadcast a Morse code. Okay. This, I believe, is where you're speaking. So if you're on COM 1, you can talk to ATC on COM 1. If you're on COM 2, say you set it to ground, so you can actually talk to the ground crew on COM 2. Or if you want to address the cabin and you want to tell those guys back there to stop yelling and to put away the whiskey, then yeah. You can also turn up and down your volume. So say ATC says you're just screaming loud, you can turn that volume up. If you're very soft-spoken, down, and you're soft-spoken and ATC can't hear you, you can turn it up until you hit the max, then you just have to actually speak up. Audio, you can pipe that to the speaker, so it will actually come out of the dash, say that your headset fails, or you don't want to use the headset, and you just turn this on, and whatever noise was coming out of his speakers, out of the pilot side, that will come out of the actual dash. There's emergency and normal mode. I'm not sure that's modeled, but essentially, I don't know what it does. I've never used it. I've never needed to. I think it switches over to a backup set of breakers probably with a higher amperage. And then this is voice, both, or range. I don't know what they do. I could ask my dad because he's actually flown this aircraft, but we're not going to ever use it, so that's not going to be a problem. Ground power, if you actually go outside and you hook up a... I don't know if you can do it in this aircraft. You might be able to, but you can tell X-Plane to hook up a ground power, and you can hit this, and it will plug in, and you can use the comms on the ground. Paging and interphone, I think it's just the volume of things like buttons, and when you page through here, it will make noise. I think that's all it is. Exact same thing on this side, except for this side, from this little line down, is different left and right. A little bit. Okay. This is your DME, so that's channel 1 or channel 2. You can essentially set it channel 1 or channel 2, I guess. So this is actually the listening of it, because you can only listen to one DME at once. Channel 1, if you've got that set in the navigation, then you can listen to the channel 1 DME. If you've got it set over here in nav 2, you can switch it over to channel 2 DME, and it will come in through the DME. Same thing with the marker beacon. There's 1 and 2, high and low. I'm not entirely sure why it's that way, but yeah. ENCD, altimeter 1, ENCD 32. Never seen those. Well, sorry, never paid attention to those. As you run through tutorials, you find more things. You'll never use them. I've never used them or even looked for them or known what they are. So, this guy, right smack dab in the middle of your dash, is important. Yeah. I don't know what it does. So this guy is very important. This is your Autopilot altitude set. So even if you're not flying on Autopilot, say the controller tells you climb up to 11,000 feet. You can climb to 11,000 feet. Push it. You can go 11,500 feet. Pull it. You can change the thousands. So it's just quicker, faster, push, pull. Lets you set a specific altitude. If the autopilot is engaged, it will fly that altitude, depending on your mode. If ATC tells you climb to this altitude, you normally want to set it in there because it will... there's no tape on this one. In the big jets, there's a tape with your speed, and it will actually put in a notch there, or some kind of marker. In this one, it's just a... What did ATC say to stop at again? Oh, 10,000. Okay, we're going up to 10,000. There's a little alert button. It beeps when you get close to it. If it doesn't cut out and stop beeping, you could hit that. Okay, we will cover the Garmin's in depth in another tutorial. I'll cover some quick things in just a second as we go through the comms, but we're not going to do everything at the moment. So, comms, big one, twist right, changes the bottom only. It does not change the top. So, it will only change this bottom one, which is the standby. So, say that they say go to 126.0, you'll squeak over the big one, squeak over the little one, then you actually hit the switch button. I don't know what down does, but up changes, it puts standby into active and active into standby. Very simple, but you can only change this bottom one. You cannot change the top one. It's very good for, okay, he said to go over there, call over, nobody answered, I might be on the wrong frequency, the channel might be down, okay, hit back over, hey, controller, they didn't answer, where should I go next? Standard, on, off. There's a squelch off mode, but I'm not entirely sure what it does. Not entirely sure what this little dial does either. There's a couple other things on here that are not implemented, but long story short, all four of, well, pretty much everything works that way. You can only change the bottom, can't change the top. and you just hit the switch and it swaps them. Relatively easy. Relatively. Can't change to hold. That's so. Comms are frequencies that you will hear. The lowest is 118, I believe, and the highest is lowest is 118. Highest is 136.99. I think you can get all the way up there. 137 is not a frequency you can use in this. Then you have the navigation. Highest is just below it, 117, all the way down to 108. So these you will turn into VORs, NDBs, ILSs. This is all your navigation kind of stuff. That's where you tune it in right here. You can also change it in here, but for now, that's how you manually do it. This is COM1, NAV1, COM2, NAV2. Super simple. That's all there really is to that. They are synced with the Garmin, so as you change frequency, it is changing this. You can swap them by this button instead of using this toggle. That's not implemented, but that's all it is. For now, we're going to leave this alone. Other than the fact that COM and the locators are here, only one is on here. Two, you have to look at over here. You also have to switch over here, but yeah. But for now, we're going to leave that alone. There's going to be a full set of tutorials just on this because these are very in-depth, very complicated. There are a lot of menu options and a lot of things you can do. We're going to come down here. Here's the Collins transponder. So when you start the aircraft, when you start doing your checklist, you will turn it to standby. 1200 is standard for VFR. Those are visual flight rules. That's what you're going to fly 90% of the time. If ATC tells you, okay, you're under my control, so say you want to pass over the Colorado Springs Airport, they can tell you, okay, squawk 125. 1205. Tune that in. This is a live change. So there is no backup. Whatever you're squawking, you're squawking. Not this one doesn't, but some of them have a VFR button where it will set it back to 1200 for you. This one doesn't, unfortunately. You will have to manually set it back to 1200 when you leave ATC. This means you are not under anybody's control. They're not telling you what to do, and you are under visual flight rules. So that's that. On is actually screaming out to the world, hey, I'm 1200, this is where I am. It gives, I think this one's mode C, so it gives your altitude, it can give your altitude, it gives your position, and it can give your speed. I think it does give your speed. So it gives your position and your speed when it's on, and it gives your altitude, position, and speed when you're on altitude mode. Normally you will put it in alt mode because it just gives the controller one more piece of information. So say you're flying underneath the Denver Airport's airspace. If you don't turn on altitude, they will keep asking you, what's your altitude? Are you in my airspace? If you're trying to skirt it and you're trying to go underneath the upside down wedding cake, it will bug them because they have aircraft going overhead and they need to know that you are not in their airspace. So turn on altitude, leave it there, it tells them. When you show up and you first contact a controller, normally they'll tell you to ident. It literally just screams, hey, I'm identing, and on their screen you will flash. So sometimes you will hear, here's your flash. Pilots will say that. Here's your flash. Is that it? It will go away after a little bit of time. Unfortunately, you can't really do much about it. Ground is standby. Once you actually start moving, you turn it on. I always leave it on altitude. As soon as you're moving, you turn it on. That way the ground guys can see you on their screens instead of actually having to look out the window. It's good for big airports. In Europe, you don't turn it on until you go to take off. To me, that's just one thing to forget. I've never actually used the ADF, but it's the same as everything else. Turn in numbers, you tune in the numbers, and that's it. If you want to actually use the ADF, Might have to do a little more research, but I'm pretty sure it's just switch this to ADF and it will point to the beacon. Kind of the same as VOR from my understanding, but it gives you more directional information. It'll give you distance, I think. Not entirely sure, but it could. It might. I mean, I know a DME is a distance measuring equipment. I think if you tune in a DME, which I don't think you can do on the ADF, you might be able to. But if you tune in a DME, it will tell you your distance. Okay, that's all the comms. We're not going to cover these Garmins for now. They are complicated in depth, and this video is already going on quite long. And we haven't even gotten to most of the other exciting stuff. So, we are coming down there, which means there's a breeze out there. There's a breeze. Cool. Alright. Down here, there are a plethora of buttons and switches. All of them are incredibly important. Parking brake is actually modeled. It used to not be modeled. When they made this guide, it said the parking brake wasn't modeled. So, we're just going to cover left to right in the categories, quadrants, etc. Or we might just follow the manual. We'll see. Standard battery, it is 24 volt battery, 26 volts and then 26 to 28 is on if the engine's running and you have the generators going. This powers basically all your electronics with the exception of the avionics. That is the avionics master power right here, so when we turn that off, you lose all of the screens. These are avionics. They have a separate tie-in that we can just pop it on and off if you've got any discrepancies, etc. Not really a good thing to be doing, but just in case you need to. Alright, that covers avionics. You have one inverter. Up is primary, down is your secondary, which basically means the left and the right wings. So an inverter converts the DC into AC electrical current. So that will convert the battery into anything AC. So if you've got an outlet in the back, you can plug your computer in. I think all the systems are DC, but if you have any systems that are AC, you will need that to actually convert it so that you can use those instruments that are AC power. I think they're all DC though, so the only things in here are literally laptops and power for stuff like that. So if there's anything in the back. You will still need to turn that on. It's in the checklist. You probably won't need it very much. So moving on. So these engine auto ignition. Once the engine is going, these will essentially detect if the engine is starting to stall, if it's not on fire and spinning, etc. So it will automatically try to relight an engine just based on the fact that it's spinning, and you don't have to engage the starter motor to manually crank it. So it will, there are spark plugs in normally 2 of the cylinders, and it will start firing those, try and reignite the fuel going through, and try and get your engine relit if you have an engine out. It can be heavy rain, icing, you accidentally flub the throttles. It could be anything. Or flub the mixture. I don't know what I'm saying anymore, but basically if you manage to kill an engine, this will try to relight it. Generators. You have one generator on the left, one generator on the right. Basically these recharge the batteries. So if you do not turn them on, you will run out of battery power. You will lose all your electronics in the entire aircraft if you do not turn those on when the engines are running. So essentially those are reverse motors. It spins the shaft from the engine, and instead of providing electrical current to a motor to spin something, it is being spun, which provides electrical current back to the battery. So basically these are your battery recharging. You've got one on the left, one on the right. Very simple switch. On, off, and then up is a reset. So say that you're not getting any power from the right side, you can just hit reset and it'll kind of toggle a bus. And yeah. So, the engine anti-ice, these essentially open a vein which redirects air. I believe it redirects some hot air back to the front so that it essentially melts ice on and off. And say you left one failed and you know about it beforehand, mechanic says don't use the left anti-ice vein. You can turn that to standby so that when you turn on left, I think that's how it works. There might actually be some boots that they open and close to break ice. Not 100% certain on those, but when we need anti-ice, I always turn these on and call that good. I've never had to use the other ones, and I've actually got a video on the channel that shows me failing miserably, starting to lose instruments because they're icing over. That's where I use these, and they were incredibly useful. Okay, there's also a gen tie switch. Normally, they are... I believe that's normal? Nope, they're closed. So the generators do not talk to each other. If you open them, they will talk to each other, essentially, which could cause some issues electrically. Doesn't like that, so normally it is closed, and I believe we normally leave it closed. Let's come down here and cover ignition and engine start. So, oops. Anyways, it's going to get a little loud. We'll let that die off. It should be not running. There we go. So it just played a sound. It's not actually running. So, left engine, ignition, turn that on, and it will constantly be spiking. It will constantly be sparking these spark plugs. If you want to actually start and spin the engine, see, it's not actually spinning. You have to use the starter to spin it. So you will push down, a little electrical motor engages, and it's actually starting to spin the engine. You saw it change direction. You hold this, and it's got a little electrical motor in there that's actually spinning the engine. You use that for startup. Once that's ignited and everything else, you won't turn it to on unless you're in like severe heavy rain and there's a risk of having a flame out. But if you turn the engine auto ignition to arm, it will automatically keep this. It will turn this on when necessary. So if it detects it's failing, it will arm it. If you always leave it on, it'll burn out your spark plugs. So yeah, normally you will use this just if you're on the ground, if you're in heavy weather, you know you need that extra ignition power. Keep it going. Like it's just constantly dying on you. That's when you'll turn it on. Or else you'll normally keep the engine auto ignition and not worry about it. Okay. Auto feather. Feathering a prop is turning it. Normally the props are biting air. They're taking a small chunk of air. And if it's perfectly flat, so that it's not grabbing any air and it's just slicing through the air, the prop's going to spin really fast. If it's tilted just a little bit, it's going to grab just a little bit of air. If it's tilted really violently, it's going to basically be like a sailboat in the wind, and it's just going to be smashing into the air. But say the engine stops, it's a huge amount of drag because you're going this way and it's just this gigantic wall pushing the air. The prop becomes a negative, super huge drag, and it's not helping you anymore. So to feather an engine, it actually turns it so that the blade is in the wind and it'll stop spinning, and it's just a knife going through the wind. It's not great on the drag, but it's significantly better than having that gigantic flat face. Auto feather means that it will automatically turn it for you if an engine fails. So if you have prop sync in auto feather and an engine fails, well, it might feather both engines, but it might feather one and cause the other one to fail, trying to get it to low enough RPM. There's a test which I believe just twists the engine, twists it so that it's that way. Yeah, not helpful. I can't see it moving. Let's see. Not helpful. Testing it, I think you would do when it's spinning. Prop governor test, you basically hit that and it will kill the RPMs. Super simple. Not entirely sure it's mapped. Same with most things, unfortunately. Oh yeah, super important. Left knee is the parking brake. Alright, defroster error, say the inside starts to fog up. You can turn that on, and it acts just like a car defroster. It blows hot air. Standard lights. Landing lights, you will use those only on the runway. You do not use those on the ground when taxiing. You have taxi lights for that. That is only when you are moving. If you stop, if an airplane's going in front of you, ATC tells you hold short for this guy, if you're holding short of the runway, etc., you will keep the taxi lights off. Only when you're, okay, I'm about ready to move, flash the taxi lights at the ground guy, he will push you out. Well, in real life, you have to do it yourself here. Then you finish all your startup stuff, you finish all your checklists, and you will turn the taxi lights on and start moving. ATC says hold short of taxiway, you'll get to the taxiway, you'll turn your taxi lights off. When they say continue, you'll turn them back on, you'll continue over the runway, you stop short of the runway, you turn your taxi lights off. They say continue again, you turn them back on. Nice and simple. I always forget to do it because it's another thing and a plethora of stuff you have to do in an aircraft. Ice lights literally are a set of lights that point on the wing so that you can look at the wing at night. Because the only way to really detect ice is to see it. So those lights literally just go over there. Navigation lights are all the way on the very end. They're your blue and red, left and right. That's kind of what they are. I think the recognition lights are the flashing ones. But yeah. Then there are beacon, strobe, and tail flood. Tail flood is just the one on the back that lets you see the tail at night. It's yeah. The strobe is below the aircraft, and it's a white flashing strobe. So it's flash, 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 I'm here. Flash, 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 I'm here. Some of them are just on, off. It's just a strobe. It's a very high visibility. I can see it. It's strobing. Hopefully you can see me. Recognition. Alright, beacon are your... I think that's on the tail. Yep, beacon is your tail. And that's just the red light on the top. That's a beacon. It's a third navigation light, essentially. Landing gear, very simple. Up, down. Hope it's in the right position. Always verify. This is your breaker. Say you put the landing gear down and it pops the breaker. You push the breaker back in sometimes. There's procedures for that. I won't cover any of them because I don't actually know them. Okay, ice protection. Windshields, you have, it's normally off. It's just a bunch of heated coils, kind of like the rear, not windshield, rear piece of glass in your car. Normally you see those lines going through it. Those are heated coils. Same kind of thing. They're just incredibly thin in aircraft. Normal, off, or if you're in heavy icing, you can turn them all the way on high. This is the left side, this is the right side, and nice and simple. Prop is just everything. It does have some heated prop. You can get it warm. So if your prop is icing up, it will start to lose lift and it will stop grabbing air very well, and you'll start having trouble with that. So you can turn the prop icing on, anti-icing on, but normally it's moving so fast that it just can't beat up. It's got to be significant Rhine ice for that. There are two fuel vents which prevent it. A, lets air in, and B, if you're sitting on the ground, it just lets all those vapors out so that it doesn't pressurize your tank. If those freeze up, you can get a negative vacuum, which will cause the fuel pump to fight the vacuum, which will make it lower head pressure, which means lower fuel to the engine, and if it's bad enough, it can actually cause failure and seizure of the fuel pump because air is not getting into the tank. So you will actually lose fuel to left side, right side pumps, vents, etc. Surface de-ice, there's a single and a manual. I don't know if you guys will be able to see it, but this little black boot there, essentially it inflates really fast and it breaks all the ice. So you have to wait for the ice to actually build up into a nice little layer, and then you'll break it and it'll shatter and it'll fly off the wing in a chunk. If you do it while it's wet and you keep cycling it, it just makes it stick. So when you go up, it's elastic essentially. I'm going to see if we can cycle it. I doubt we can. especially on the ground. It works, but you can't see it. I heard it. I don't know if you guys did, but yeah. Okay, the stall warning. On the back of the wing. There's a little tab that the air comes over the wing, hits that tab, and keeps it down. When the air starts to separate from the wing, it will actually start letting this tab up, and when the air actually separates, it will go off and it will start beeping at you. Because it's an actuated switch, it again needs some heat. Pitot heat, there are left and right. These measure your... They've got a couple of different things. They primarily measure your airspeed. It goes in the tube, makes a turn, hits a diaphragm, pushes on that, and tells you what your airspeed is. It's also normally, not always, but normally that's where your static port is on the back as well. If that freezes up, your altitude will stop going up and down. That's a problem. Yeah, so that's down there. Oh yeah, the lights. 3 green. You always hear people say that. That means the nose, the left, and the right landing gear all came down. If you get a red, or they stay dark, that means you didn't get a gear coming down, and you are in trouble. That's a bad thing. Alright, how long have I been talking? Over an hour. Okay, that's a lot of information. We are getting to the end, though. Yeah, there's also a backup vertical speed indicator here. And this is a cabin altitude. That's for pressurization inside. There's a lot of information on this panel, on the pedestal, and up top. That's what we've got to cover. And the right side. Let's press on. There's a lot of stuff to cover. I hope you guys are enjoying this, because that's a lot of information. This shows your flaps angle. As they go down, it shows you what angle they're currently at. This is your flaps lever. Nice and simple. Prop forward. This is almost no bite. Pull them back. It's got a huge bite. It's creating a lot of torque. It's slowing the engine down a lot, though. All the way back, it is perfectly flat. The engine better be stopped, because if it was not, it will be soon, because you're essentially stalling it. Standard throttle. Forward is more fuel, not faster engine. So that's actually adding fuel versus, hey, I need it to spin faster. Add some fuel. Nope. Hey, I need it to spin faster. I need to add more fuel. Decrease the prop. There's a couple more things. This is what is known as a complex aircraft. It is not your simple go faster, go slower, add more fuel. It's change the mixture, sorry. It's not quite that simple. But essentially, this is add more fuel, change how much it bites, change how fast you want it to spin. Then you have the... You can think of this as a mixture if you're coming from something like a Cessna 172. But this is essentially your, I need to put a lot of fuel in the engine or a little bit of fuel. You normally only use 2 modes. Here is low idle. The engine will run a little bit slower. Basically, this is your ground mode. There is high idle. You basically leave it in that, you never move it. You pull it back a little bit, it doesn't help you because it's a jet engine, so it's automatically adjusting the burn ratio of the amount of fuel you're adding to get the perfect burning clean ratio. So you really don't move this other than I'm on the ground. This is taxi, I'm on the ground, and startup to I'm in the air. I'm about ready to take off, etc. Fuel cutoff is completely on the bottom. That actually shuts off fuel completely. There's no fuel going to the engine. Then you're going to bump it up to low idle. There's a procedure for startup. We'll cover that in another video. And yeah, so fuel cut off right now because I don't want the engine starting. Here's your trim tab. This is, oops, not mapped. Grr. I hate it when it's not mapped. Alright, but basically this is trim up, trim down. Nose goes up, nose goes down. Makes it so you can relieve back pressure and front pressure on the stick. These look like they are all friction locks that basically makes it in the real aircraft so that they are harder and softer to move. If you're sitting there and the prop is walking back on you, you need to turn that up. In real life, it stays because it's synced electronically. This is your rudder trim. This is your aileron trim, so that controls roll. Your rudder trim controls whether the tail end kicks right or left. And then your elevator trim is pitch up, pitch down, and it will basically relieve back pressure, forward pressure, right, left, and rudder pressure, right or left. Again, there's the flaps, and that pretty much covers the pedestal here. We're going to cover these gauges later when we get into the pressurization system. None of these are functional, so down. This is a complex system, to say the least. So, starting in the top left, this controls, well, I guess this entire top first row panel controls the EFIS system. This is EFIS on and off. Those are your displays right there, and all the information that goes to them. You want to turn that on. I think that's an emergency mode. You just leave it normal. There's a test button. I don't really use it. There's probably a procedure that does. I've yet to use it. Navigation data. This is on the bottom one. You can have it show your ground speed. If you rotate the bottom dial all the way left, you can have it show your, so this is ground speed. It'll show up there if you're actually moving. Wind data. This is relative to the aircraft. It's going that direction at 9 knots. And you can have it show time to go or en route time. Time to go is the time to target. So if you set up a waypoint, it'll tell you how many minutes you are from that waypoint. Time en route is just how long you've been flying. Again, this is the heading bug, left, right, push to sync where you currently are. I normally like putting this on wind. If I'm doing calculations like, am I going to hit that mountain? I put it on ground speed to get that. These guys are for what is showing up on this bottom display. Normally, I will leave it in that ring. So there's a map mode. This shows you your map. You can look at waypoints and stuff like that. So say you're doing route planning. This is a pretty decent screen for that, but not the best one. Arc puts it in a little arc on the bottom or on the top. This is your left, right, same as this guy. And there's your arc. There's an HSI, which is the standard indicator that I like to leave it in. You can have another arc, and you can have another map. These two have a weather radar overlay in them. So if you're flying and you see weather in the front, you'll turn them over to the right side where it'll actually overlay the weather radar on them. There's currently no weather, and I think I have the weather radar off, so yeah, not helpful. I don't know if I've actually used these buttons, but if I ever use them, I'll let you know what they do. Okay, this does your course. So there's pre, which is not modeled, there's actual, which is modeled, and there's transfer, which is not modeled. So basically leave it in ACT because no matter what you do, nothing will change. But rotating the top dial will change things. This rotates your course. This rotates this line and not this guy. So essentially it's doing the same as this guy is. This one just does it up here. So this is your course select. Say you need to fly, say the runway is due south, 180. This would tell us that, due north. This would tell us that we need to come right. We need to, oh boy, it's difficult doing backwards. This means we are left, it's backwards. Turn it so I can actually see what I'm doing. My brain. I haven't flown in too long. Runway is due south. This means that we need to fly left so that the runway comes over. Think of this as physically the runway, and this is your airplane. So you are to the right of the runway. As you fly left, the runway will come over to meet you, and you can line up with the runway there. This is the heading that it's going to be on. You're going to fly, this is the direction you're heading, so you'll fly something like 1-5, about 30 degrees off. And as this comes in, you will go over to align with this so that this is right in the middle. And you can change the left one down here. And that goes direct, which means this is direct to whatever waypoint you set. So if you're doing the VOR and the stuff like that, even the ILS, you can have it just tell you it's over there. So, yeah. Then you can change it if you want to align with it versus just point at it. So yeah, this is your autopilot panel. This one's complicated. So, this will maintain a set bank. So if you want to maintain, I think, a set roll. So like if you have a strong crosswind from the left and is pushing the tail, you can actually hit that and it will constantly try and roll on you. So it will try to stay that way. This is half bank, where it will only bank at, it will make a 4-minute turn instead of a 2-minute turn. We talked about that earlier. It will stay at 4-minute turn, which is roughly half the bank. Autopilot engage and disengage does absolutely nothing unless you have anything else engaged. Yaw damper, so this will essentially keep you flying straight. It will keep that ball centered. So if you're making a turn, it will try and keep you coordinated instead of having you slip up. Because as you turn, you'll essentially do that. Well, not the roll, but you will slide up the wall, basically. And the yaw damper will keep you so you're actually turning and staying level with the ground instead of on the wall. Disengage, yeah. Interesting. Oh, so it gives you a little couple of seconds to disengage. Heading mode will follow that little purple indicator, whatever your heading is set to. Nav mode will follow the GPS. If you set it for a VOR, it will navigate to the VOR. If you set it on an ILS, it will navigate so that it's on course, etc. There's a lot to that button. It will take a while to explain it all. A lot of these work in conjunction with each other. So, say you have heading, you can't have navigation. Well, you can have navigation and heading on to intercept your GPS, because the nav does not know where the GPS is. So you have to say, fly into this line, now intercept the line. So you will engage both heading and nav mode, and it will fly over there, and then it will disengage heading mode and fly just nav. In addition to that, you can do approach mode, which will essentially try and, it will try to connect to the ILS. So it will fly the approach down for you. It will line you up on the runway and keep you coming down so that you are there. You still have to do throttles and mixture, prop, everything else, but it will keep you on the right glide slope. BC is actually a reverse course. It's weird. It will keep you left and right. You have to do up and down. But essentially say that the ILS is for runway 1, I guess 180, then it will make it so that you can fly an ILS the other direction, but you're going to still have to hit the other end of the runway. Because normally an ILS is set up at the end of a runway, not in the middle, because you want to hit back here. You want to come in and hit at the very beginning. You don't want to hit in the middle. So when you turn it in reverse, you want to still hit on the tip of the other side, whereas if you follow the ILS, it will come in over there. So, something to be aware of. If you hit this, it just says you're in climb mode, and you're basically trying to climb up to an altitude. That brings us into altitude mode. So if you hit this, it will just stay at an altitude. If you do altitude select, that will arm the altitude so that when you get there, it will hold it. Vertical speed mode basically says, I hit that, then you use this guy for up and down, and you say, I want to climb at 300 feet per minute. Don't care what my speed is, don't care what my pitch is, just climb at 300 feet per minute. You can set that to whatever you like, and then say you have 10,000 feet, you're climbing, say you set that for 1,000 feet and you're at 8,000, it'll climb up to 9,000, it'll beep at you telling you that you're 9,000 feet, you're 1,000 feet away from where you're going, and then it will start to level off for you, and it will go from altitude, it will go from vertical speed and altitude select to altitude hold. So, that is in fact a thing. You can get there a lot of ways. One of them is instrument airspeed. So say you want to maintain that perfect climb speed. You can set it for 108, you can pitch for it, you can hit this button, and it will climb, or it will pitch the aircraft up and down to maintain that speed. So if you cut the throttles, it will pitch way down to maintain that speed. If you add more throttle, it will pitch up, increase your vertical speed, and maintain that airspeed. You can actually change that by using this up and down button, same as you with the vertical speed. So say you set it at 104 knots and you want 108 knots, you can do up to 108 knots. Descent, I don't really use climb and descent modes. Climb mode, essentially, I think you can use climb mode in conjunction with navigation, and it will climb those steps for you, and it will hit those altitudes. Altitude you have to set at the maximum altitude you can go to. So say they clear you only up to 10,000 feet, and your procedure goes up to 12, it will stop at 10. But I believe this will follow the waypoints and climb out for you. Descent, it will follow the descent waypoints, and it will do the step downs for you. So that's a very simple intro to the Autopilot. Very basic, very simple. We're going to get into some tutorials actually flying it. Also, flight director is a little caret right here. So say that you tune in, let's change our heading to the left, and we want to go up to 10,000 feet. It will actually angle this left so that we can just follow that, and it will not necessarily fly for us, but it tells us when to turn, what we should be pitching at, etc. So if we set an airspeed and a heading, it will point so that it will go up and down so that it maintains our airspeed, and it will go left or right to turn us to our heading at the same time. Because as you turn, you lose a little bit of lift, so you will have to pitch down a little bit, etc. It's a flight director. It's kind of a guidance, if you want to think of it that way. Fly this way is kind of what it's telling you. Cabin pressure. This is part of the pressurization system. Rudder boost. This is a pump. You need that on. Elevator trim, you need on, or else you cannot trim it. This wheel will not do anything. That was my problem, so it is mapped. This wheel will not do anything when the elevator trim is turned off. Rudder boost, I believe, is a hydraulic addition, because it's a standard push. It gets really heavy. So if you turn on the rudder boost, you push and it's light as a feather. Well, light. And it will augment to make this easier. Cabin pressure, this is part of the pressurization system. Say that it's overpressurizing and you just can't get it to disengage, you can push that and it will dump all the pressure. It's not a good thing to be doing. You don't really want to be doing it ever, really. But say that you landed and you're at 8,000 feet and the cabin is still at 12,000 feet. You want to hit that and it will dump all the pressure immediately. It just opens a gigantic blow-off valve and it'll pressurize it. Because if you open the door like that, A, you can't open the door, but B, if you were able to force open the door, it will explode outwards. So it's called an explosive decompression. Alright, this is the pressurization system. You can turn it so that it will slowly go up in altitude, so no matter how fast or how slow you go, it will slowly go up. So say you have sensitive ears and your ears just do not like changing in altitude, you can increase or decrease this to compensate for that. Cabin altitude is, you will set your actual altitude you are flying. Say we're only going to fly at 18,000 feet today. You will point the inside to 18,000 feet, and the cabin altitude will pretend that you're at 4,800 feet. It will pressurize the inside so that you're only at 4,800 feet. If you are flying at 22,000 feet, it will pressurize it for 7,200 feet. basically, the higher you go, the closer it will bring you to the actual pressure, but you basically you just tune that, and it's nice and simple. Now, there's a little bit more environmental and cabin stuff over here. Here's some cabin air. Defrost is on the left side. This is cabin air, so it's actually, kind of think of this as AC. This is a bar light, so overhead turns on the bar so that people can see. Cabin lights, turn them dim, turn them bright. That way they can see their work papers or not. The cabinet is behind us. That is back there. And then you have the no smoking signs. Or the just fasten seatbelts if you let them smoke. Because sometimes these aircraft are just owned by whoever wants them. They're expensive, but you can do that. Bleed air valves are part of the engine system. You can take hot air in from the engines, and you can route them into the cabin. So when you pull the cabin air out, and you keep these closed, you're actually getting air conditioning. When you turn them on, you can get some heat. And this is an electrical heater. Usually on normal. It will heat the inside cabin pressure, or if you just want the outside pressure and you want to save your electricity, which will actually save you money, you can use those. Manual temperature increase and decrease. Say I'm too cold, too hot. This is a vent blower. Not implemented. Basically, it's just your fan, kind of like your recirc or when you turn it on. Cabin temperature. Turn it up, turn it down. Too hot, too cold. That sets auto mode. We are too cold. We'll turn it up. It will maintain that temperature. Manual cooling, manual heating. There is a cabin temperature. Oh, well, that's just, yeah, mode. Alrighty, let's scoot this guy over. Super fast, super exciting. I don't have a Copilot one mapped. Oh, and something super important. Grrr, stop it. There. We're gonna go that way. Better, much better. Okay, we are going to cover this little guy. This changes what the primary navigation source is. So if you want to fly based on nav radio 1, over there, you turn it to 1. If you want to fly based on nav radio 2, you turn it to 2. Most important thing that I always forget, if you're flying off of the GPS and you want to follow the little pink line, turn it to GPS. Seems simple, it's just easy to forget. Okay, can we not be in the seat? Good enough. Yeah, that's the 3 modes you get in this aircraft. Alright, Copilot air, just if he's hot. Gyro suction, so this is the vacuum I was talking about, measured in inches of mercury. If that is at 0, this gauge, I think just those 2 gauges will not work. No suction, you cannot have a bowl spinning that's, yeah. Here's the normal mic versus oxygen mask. So if you have an emergency, these guys have to put on an oxygen mask within 8 seconds, I believe it is. Grab that, put that on, and you can switch from an actual headset mic, so something like this, with a little boom that comes out, to a actual oxygen mask. Think like you see on fighter pilots, you can switch that over to the oxygen mask. Here's the flight hours. I've apparently got 3 hours and 2/10 of an hour. Okay, good. Pneumatic pressure, so that's for things like the de-icing boots. That might be why we weren't able to get any of that. There are physical oxygen bottles in the back that you have to use and refill to get the oxygen in the cabin. So when you use this pressurization system, you have to refill the oxygen as well. This one I don't think has a default switch, I guess. Cabin air, this just tells you what the inside temperature is. It is currently at 47 degrees, which is the same side as outside. Slightly warmer. I'm sorry, pilots, you are probably freezing. And last but not least, up. This is the backup compass. It's just the backup compass. There's no way to adjust it, so if you have magnetic variance, you have to account for that yourself. And I'm not really going to go into it because that's procedures for later. This is your DC percentage load, left and right. So, say you're capable of supplying 100 amps total. The entire aircraft cannot exceed 100 amps. Say you're pulling 40 amps, it'll be over here at 40. If you're not using anything at all, like we're not now, well, we're using just a smidgen to power the electronics, it'll be down there. If you're using everything she's got, you're at 100%, not necessarily great. DC volts, we're only producing 5 at the moment, so that's your voltage. It's probably dropping because we're playing with it. It should be around 26, 28, I believe it is. There's your AC volts, that's coming out of the inverter. Prop amps, this is how much is coming out of the propeller, I believe. Don't know what that is. And then you've got all your lights up here. So do not operate on dry glass. That's a windshield. Yep. Yeah. So off, slow, fast. Standard windshield wipers, you'll only ever use those on the ground. Normally when you get the air going over it fast enough, then it doesn't matter. Turn the floodlights up. I should be able to turn the floodlights up. Weird. That's just overhead lights. The Avionics panel lights, instrument lights, overhead panel, side panels, the Copilot gyro, the Copilot flight lights. And yeah. That covers just about everything. There is a circuit breaker here. You can't really interact with it, but all these normally will pop out and pop in. You don't want them to be popped out. Usually you'll run your hand over them, or you will actually hear them pop out. Here's the pilot's one. You can't interact with them. It's just a flat texture. Firewall shut-off valve, you can't do anything with those. And yeah, there's the rudder pedals. Can't do anything with those. But that is an overview of all of the systems, what they are, but not necessarily how to use them. It is a decent representation of what they are supposed to do, but not necessarily how to use them. So, hopefully you guys enjoyed that excessively long video. That's just covering the inside. We can go outside. I'm going to start running through procedures so you guys can see those. But I hope you guys joined it. That was a very long-winded explanation. We still have to cover some things like avionics. Or not avionics, the GPSs. Then we have to actually go use them and fly with them. Oh boy. Oh, forgot 2 things. This is a horn. That's the test. That's the stall horn. That thing will light up. Sorry, they're loud and obnoxious. This is the GPWS, ground positioning warning system, I think. It has something to do with GPS. That means basically this is failing. You have your caution and then your master warning. If the master warning ever goes off, you've got serious problems. If you've got caution, that means things like light ice, or it's having to use the auto ignition, electrical faults, non-important breakers, stuff like that. Okay. Last thing I can think of is the outside air temperature. Celsius, 6 degrees, Fahrenheit, 44 degrees. You'll use these for a couple of calculations. It's also kind of fun to know. But I think we are going to call that one here for now. All of the things on specific controllers, such as the microphone, the trim, how you set those up. I always forget that flaps are there. I need to remap that again. How all those are set up, we might go into in another episode if you're interested. But for now, that's going to be all. So thank you guys for joining. I hope you guys learned something. I'm not sure that was the most enjoyable video, but I hope you learned a lot, frankly. And we will see you guys in the next episode, where I think we're going to cover the avionics of the Garmin and how to use both the 550 and the 530 and the 430. I don't remember what the actual numbers are. I don't think it says. Nope, 530 and 430. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this at least a little bit. We will see you guys in the next episode.